Hello, welcome to the G.I. Joe New News Review. I am David Allen. The following content was originally intended for the G.I. Joe fan club, but due to unforeseen circumstances, this content will no longer be used in that venue. And so I wanted to share them with you here. I hope you enjoy. Hello, welcome to another episode of the G.I. Joe Fan Club Live. I am David Allen. I am the host, and I am joined by my special guest, the author of Total Action Force, The Battle Years, and Volume 2, Total Action Force, which is just had a third Kickstarter for the soft cover. And this is going to be filmed or presented after the fact. So I'm hoping that was a successful Kickstarter. Brian.
Fingers crossed.
Paddy. Yeah, fingers crossed. The Action Force at the moment has become kind of a more of an interesting subject with a lot of things that have been happening over the last few years. So the G.I. Joe Fan Club Live covers all aspects of G.I. Joe. In every episode, we cover a different topic. And so this episode, I thought with the uptick in the interest of Action Force, that I would do a episode about Action Force. And so I thought there's no better person that I could get to talk about Action Force than the author of two fantastic volumes about Action Force over the last couple of years. So thank you very much, Paddy, Lennon, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, as always, David. Always happy to jump on and talk.
That's the cool thing about G.I. Joe. All us fans, we love talking about G.I. Joe, don't we?
So it's very difficult to get some of us to stop.
It's true. It's true. So the thing about Action Force, the reason why I felt that the interest of Action Force has gotten an uptick is, one, IDW has been adding Action Force characters to their covers and their compilation issues. This is issue 300, and this is issue 300. These both have Action Force characters on there. And the Rising Sun publishing has been doing the new Palitoy Action Force Redux comics, and they just did their Kickstarter for volume 4. And look at that! Look who just joined us, the publisher himself, Hawk Sanders. Hello, Hawk. Thank you for joining us.
How you doing? I apologize for being a little bit late here, guys. Paddy, it's such an honor to finally get to talk to you. I think this is the first time you and I have had a chance to communicate.
Yeah, nice to talk to you.
So I was just saying that the uptake in interest of Action Force has been a really interesting over the last few years. Obviously, Skeletron, the hat I'm wearing for the Kickstarter for that, we should be getting that maybe around May. We already got the miniature Skeledrones. I don't have my Skeledrone handy to show that off, but I showed off Paddy's books, volume 2 and volume 1 of Total Action Force, The Battle Years. And so also this guy in the back corner there, the Tiger Force Outback, which is technically a British version of Outback, and then Super 7 have done the Red Laser, Cobra Commander Red Laser figure. I have that in order. Unfortunately, it did not arrive for this video, or I would have showed it off. And there's a bunch of other stuff going on. Obviously, there are people, this isn't exactly British, but they're doing Action Force, the license, with a few other things through Valaverse, kind of Action Force related. So there's a lot going on right now in the last few years that is Action Force related in one way or another. Would you guys agree with that, or or not, Paddy?
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious. I think the uptick in interest is really. I think it really started maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago. I think American fans really discovered the Robo Skull and things like that maybe in the early, late noughties, early 2010s. You certainly started seeing them show up more at American shows. People started getting interested in trying to pick up those figures. You definitely saw an increase in interest here because you got a lot more American fans reaching out trying to buy those rarer figures, particularly the repainted G.I.Joe figures. So characters like Red Laser, like Red Jackal, and like Quarrel. Certainly those, and Gaucho as well, actually, Gaucho and Jammer. They got super popular about 10 years ago, which means they're now very difficult to find. So I think, and that interest has only really kind of grown as the G.I. Joe fandom has grown over the last, 3 or 4 years since Classify took off. Suddenly now you see a lot more American G.I. Joe fans realizing, oh, there's this other thing over there that they're starting to get interested in. And of course, that's led to, a few books, a few new comic series, the comic appearances, as you mentioned, with IDW, and of course, the culminating in the Skeletron Kickstarter last year, well, actually, the year before last now. It's 2023. With the Roboskull Mark II. So it's interesting to watch as someone who's been into Action Force since they were 5 years old, to suddenly see 35 years later that there's this new resurgence of interest in it is quite interesting to me anyway.
What's your take on it, Pac?
I can sum it up in 2 words: full force.
It's true.
I think it's amazing. We saw. I think as it's developed, we saw it actually start as a movement inside the club on the American side. It started as a movement inside the G.I. Joe Collectors Club from Fun Pub, and slowly it began to kind of build over time as more and more people knew about it. And then we got several club related items that were revolved around that, including 2 sets. Right? I think we've gotten 2 sets now that have Action Force related characters into it. So there's certainly been a kind of a slow burn, kind of as momentum is constantly building on Action Force and Action Force related stuff. And I agree with Paddy. The real igniter has been the Roboskull Mark II. Once the Roboskull Mark II comes on, I mean, it's a real, that's the bonfire that lit everything that's really progressing it all forward. And it's a beautiful piece and a great homage to everything that came before it, including the original designer, Bob Brecken, being involved. So I'm excited for what's intel. And I would love to talk to Brian Flynn. And as we know, that Super 7 is now just released a red laser. And I think that is amazing point of saying, hey, that we're full turn now. So now it's no longer club. Now it's actual full on product in stores where Action Force has returned to the shelves in a licensed capacity for anyone to buy. That's amazing. I think it's amazing. It's a great momentum and a great movement. So my take on it is that I think we're going to see an incline of more Action Force related materials moving forward. And I certainly hope that Skeletron isn't planning on putting their pencils down yet, because I think it's going to really be hot moving forward.
I do believe Ben Conway and his wonderful rock band of a team, Skeletron, have some plans in the future, because they've sense the excitement as you have, and I think they're gonna be doing some other projects. I don't know that much about those projects, but I have a very strong inkling that they're gonna do it, and it should be exciting. And the quality and the work that they put into the Skeleton speaks for itself. If you've ever seen them, and Paddy, you guys had to film it for the book, and you're doing a Skeleton Mark II book coincide with it as well, so you're involved in that as well. So it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Hawk and I have both seen it at conventions. It's absolutely incredible, and those guys are super talented, and they have a lot to offer. So I'm looking forward to what that is. Um, so with that, the the Super 7 situation, I have that on order. I was hoping it was going to be ready for this episode, but it wasn't. I didn't get it in time, which I'm sad. But that's a key point that you bring up, Hawk, is that if the American companies are now putting this stuff in the stores, because those Super 7 figures are at Target. You can find those figures at Target. So that means American brick and mortar are carrying Action Force related products. And, you know, Tiger Force is Tiger Force, but he was a British figure. So maybe not completely Action Force. I don't know. But where do you think it could go? What fun things do you think we might see from merchandising, comic book companies, toy companies? Paddy, maybe you guys got some other fun stuff in the future.
Well, I think Super 7 have said that the international releases of G.I. Joe are something they're going to focus on over the next while. So I expect we'll see a couple of more Action Force teamed figures from them. As you say, we'll have the Roboskull coming out later this year as well. I know for a fact Ben Conway thinks that this is the start of something rather than the finish of something. Their focus at the moment are trying to get the Roboskull finished in the factory, and all the obviously the ancillary figures and stuff that are coming with that. But I think once that project is out of the way, they'll be seriously looking at doing something else in that area. So you have one license holder who's interested in getting more figures out to retail, and you have obviously the fan run project via Ben getting figures out to retail. So that's exciting.
And Hawk, what's your take on it?
I definitely think we're going to see more of it moving forward. If we just look back at kind of the Red Shadows and Action Force involvement, even in the comic book series by IDW, they had more appearances, in the book than in the last decade than any decades, previous to the 80s, 70s, 70s. Yeah, it would have been 80s. But, so we're seeing more influx of these items being, put to more mainstream use. And, I think that even the fan community is really taking things to the next level too. I know we've mentioned, Skeletron, which is on a whole different level of quality and all that. But have you, I don't know if you guys know Matt Paul or not. He's doing some wonderful
I know Matt, yeah.
3D work right now. It's beautiful. I think I got in on Red Shadow's Officer and Mamba Men. And I'm excited to get Mamba Men, as well, because as you know, that's a very deep cut into the Action Force comic series. Had to get Mamba Men back out. So I think he's doing some wonderful work on even the custom side. So we're seeing that even that's going, up and above the curve. From now is no longer just a standard custom, but this is a custom cast with new parts that are producing a new figure. And so I think that we're definitely going to see more influx of it. I know that, as you guys know, that I'm working with a lot of comic related materials kind of all the time. And, one of my biggest notes that I have on my notepad was, we need more in-depth involvement from a different faction. And I think that it just makes logical sense that faction be the Red Shadows. It just, they're there, they're ready, they've been around now, and an ever-growing cast of members. So I'm expecting that we'll see a much more in entertainment media. Now, whether or not that acclimates into a movie or not, I think we're pretty far off from that. I think that it's still going to take us a while to get to that part to where we're included in any kind of a larger Hollywood budget or anything of that nature. But I certainly see us getting a lot more in the next 5 years than we've had in and probably any of the years previous.
Yeah, that's true. I think Hasbro first got to get their head out of their rear end and get a movie that's a good movie for the actual G.I. Joe before they get into Action Force. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, Hasbro, but the truth is the truth. So the Action Force has had a very, I don't know what you want to call it, bumpy history, rocky history, up and down, roller coaster over the years. They were bought out by Hasbro in like the early 90s. Palitoy was, and they incorporated them into that G.I. Joe line. Paddy, you could speak more about the details than I can. But they started as a 5 POA. They incorporated G.I. Joe into it, and then they started creating their own characters with the G.I. Joe molds, like the Cobra Commander, the Death of the Jackal, the Red Laser, and so on and so forth. You want to talk a little bit about that, Paddy? Hello?
We seem to be lagging there a little bit, but I'll talk a little bit about it. So Palitoy was actually created by and maybe Paddy can help me out here. The owner's name. He was a single owner, and he was actually operating under General Mills at the time. General Mills had owned Palitoy, and they were looking at a possible merger before the death of the owner. Previous to it, my understanding is that the Action Force line, the 5-point Action Force line, which had all original owned characters in it, was intended to be a pushback against Star Wars. They were wanting to kind of push back against the Star Wars line that was eating up so much of the market. So they with Bob's help, they had already done Action Man, and they had Action Man for a while. And if you don't know Bob Brecken, we owe him a lot for even the original 12-inch Action Man, such as the Kung Fu Grip came from Bob Brecken. The flocked hair also came from Bob Brecken. Those are big involvements in G.I. Joe overall. So we're talking like from the 60s, 70s. He made some real contributions to the G.I. Joe brand and mythos as we know it, and Action Man, Action Force. So they had a factory, and that they were in Scolesville, I believe that's how it's called. The factory and the marketing and development was actually all in the same area. The factory was right next door to it, so they were developing, at the same time. And the gentleman that owned it, hopefully Paddy can jump back on and clarify that for me real quick. He ends up passing away, and then they actually sell their toy division of General Mills out to Hasbro. So those original characters were actually started prior to it, and that was how those original characters got started. So the Red Shadows were there previous to Hasbro's buyout, as was Action Force itself. And so the once Hasbro bought out the toy division, is because they wanted a bigger distribution set and network into the UK market. It was just a natural progression, as to my understanding, up to this point, it had been licensed materials out to Palitoy previously.
So Paddy's gonna drop off. He's having some technical issues, so we'll continue the best we can without him. Sorry.
No worries. I'm gonna, just so that we're clear, I'm gonna look up Palitoy and get his name exactly. It's been a little bit.
I had a little bit of technical issue there too, so we're having a really good episode here. I thank you, Hawk, for that. I've read obviously the books, but I am not going to retain all that information. That's why I got Paddy on so he could share some of that information, being the author of these books. And let me talk a little bit about the Action Force, Palitoy's Action Force Redux, which is basically a continuation of the comics that were around in the 80s and supposedly right where they left off. I've read these issues, but I don't have the actual originals to compare them to see where they left off. But I'll let Hawk tell me if that's true or what the deal is there. And so I think they're really interesting, and there's 2 or 3 different stories with them. There's like a past story, like the origin type of thing. There's a battle type storyline in each issue, and then there's a continuous like mythology type storyline going on as well. So there's like 2 or 3 stories. And I'm finding it very fascinating. I don't have a ton of experience with Action Force and these characters, other than the few appearances that they've appeared in IDW over the years. And my fascination with Action Force, like you said earlier, where the fans got involved with the club, and it's just grown from there. And then Skeletron and all these other products. So my fascination has grown.
So, I Action Force Redux was a real effort to say, and so let's be clear, this is Palitoy's Action Force Redux, and I think actually Hasbro is using that term now too, from what I heard from a few of the Pulse cons. They're actually calling it Palitoy's Action Force. So that's in reference to when Palitoy owned the brand previous, because as we know, Bobby Vella also has Action Force, and those are amazing figures, and they're really well done, and he's doing an amazing job. Comic book series figures, beautiful stuff, wonderful to have. Let's show that on the screen. There we go. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful things. And that's to separate it from that. So I've heard several people now refer to it as Palitoy's Action Force. Not to be confused with Bobby's Action Force, or Valaverse. With Action Force Redux, we wanted to go back and kind of fill in the gaps between the story in order to bring us forward with development. So with Red Shadows and Baron Ironblood, what you're reading there is kind of inserts that fill inside the larger story. And what happened is, as Hasbro's bought out Action Force at this time, it was showing up in a comic book series called Battle Action Force, which was a weekly publication that came out in newsstands. And you can go down to your local newsstand in the UK and you could pick it up, and then you would bring it back and read it. Well, when Hasbro decided that they were going to make a shift over to phase out the Red Shadows and bring in Cobra Commander and begin selling Hasbro product through Palitoy, which had already bought Palitoy at that point, they had to come up with a storyline that actually co-aligned with how that was done. So it showed up in the books over several weeks and issues. They slowly were actually phasing out the Red Shadows. And it felt very abrupt. It felt like it happened super quick. Like Baron Ironblood is here, and now it's Cobra Commander. And it felt very cut fast. But if you really go back and look at the series, it happens over like six or 8 weeks time. It slowly phases them out over about a month and a half. So what these stories do is they kind of go back in and they're filling in some of the gaps that we didn't get to explain some of the transition between this. And it's setting, it's setting up kind of how this particular part took place. And sometimes in the earlier series, you would only have like one panel of description, and that's why it felt so fast. Single panel to say, and now he's no longer Red Jackal, but he is Destro. Now you're Destro. It was like one panel. That's all you're getting. That's it.
Didn't Jackal? Wasn't he like a Brazilian? Didn't he have a like Brazilian type background? Like
I believe he was actually German.
Oh, German.
He was part of the Action Force. He was part of Action Force in the Palitoy universe, and he was actually German. And he goes through a mad wreck, and I believe he was a vehicle driver, and he went through this mad wreck, and he was torn to bits. So the Baron gets his body and basically builds him into a cyborg that he then calls.
It's a Destro rehash. Well, I don't know who came first, Destro or Jackal.
I think Destro came first, but when Palitoy was actually renting out the license prior to Hasbro's buyout. So this is why we get Red Jackal instead of Destro. As after Hasbro buys Palitoy, they have to make the change, right? So this is why he shows up as Red Jackal, because there's a little bit of time in there, and so the guy owner's name was Alfred Pallet, and that's where we get Palitoy from, and it was in Colville, Leicestershire, in England is where it's at. Now, if you go there, there's actually a couple roads. They have like Action Man Road, and I think it's Action Force Avenue or something like that, where they've changed the names because of how popular that Palitoy was at the time. You're going to see. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Was this in Ireland?
No, that's in England. It's in England.
Okay.
But Action Force was big across all of Europe. It wasn't just the UK, and it wasn't just Ireland, and it wasn't just Scotland. It was the whole UK, including France. Like all of the European countries had Action Force.
Oh, okay.
In some version, including Turkey. Turkey had Action Force as well, that far over. So that was kind of their thing to it. And today, some of the German variants are very, very hard to get, some of the German variants. And, it's kind of interesting about the German variants of it. And this has to do with history. As you know, we came out of World War II. And the German, after going into World War I and World War II, they did not want anything to promote an idea of violence or war. So in those German variants of Action Force, they actually remove out any identity of war. They're kind of like, even though it's got guns, it doesn't really have guns, sort of thing. So it's kind of like a pacifist view on Action Force, which is a very weird concept.
It's kind of like what they did with G.I.Joe, where they took out like bullets and ammunition, and they did lasers.
Yeah. And I think Chuck talks about that, or Buzz talks about that quite a bit, right? I think it was Buzz that talked about that. Buzz Dixon, and he said that they weren't allowed to actually shoot anyone down.
Yeah.
You weren't allowed to kill anyone on screen,
They had to create very creative ways to save these guys. Some were through parachutes, some grabbed a tree limb, some fell in a river, whatever. All these weird things. You're like, wait a minute, I don't think that would really happen. I think that guy would die. But because it was a kid's cartoon, you had to kind of suspend your disbelief a little bit. And they had ratings things that were important back then for animation and children's television and stuff.
Yeah, and that was there's a lot to that. That's a whole unboxing thing all by itself.
Right.
The policies and everything that took place that changed how we do TV and marketing toys and all of that. It's a very big thing. It went all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And they actually went to the Supreme Court inside the United States.
They kind of outsmarted them, because they're like, well, look, you can advertise a comic book and comic books have G.I. Joe on it. So they kept doing weird things like that, like greeting cards. Oh, Care Bears came from a greeting cards. The Smurfs came from like a newspaper strip. So they all became toys, and they kept kind of whittling it down until ultimately they were like, just do whatever you want to do because we can't keep up with this stuff anymore.
Yeah. So this is coming out of the 50s, 60s. And what was going on is there was actually the marketing was coming up, and here we go with General Mills again. General Mills had characters on that they were promoting. Boo Berry, I think, was actually one of them, Count Chocula, things like that. And they were actually promoting children's animation and TV to buy cereal. So kids were buying up Boo Berry and chocolate. And to be clear, that these commercials were sometimes running like 15 minutes long.
Wow.
They were full episodes for Count Chocula and Boo Berry. And what was the other one? There was another one.
Frankenberries?
Frankenberry and Boo. I think there was Boo Berry too, but there was a bunch of these General Mills commercials that were actually pushing, and a lot of commercials that were pushing that were full on cartoons for kids on TV and run as ads, and you would watch the whole thing, and then kids would run out and they would want that cereal, but it was causing some extreme problems because the sugar content was so high in it. So they felt like it was manipulating children's marketing, and they had to actually step in. So then they stepped in and they said, look, you can't have a cartoon. You can't have a product on shelf without, how does it go? I think it was, you couldn't have a product on shelf and a cartoon afterward, or some vice versa. Or you couldn't have a cartoon first and then a product afterward. One had to come before the other.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it looked like you were manipulating and cheating children.
Right. Yeah.
So this is how they got around about it, right? If you already had a product out, you couldn't, you were okay to then create a cartoon animation of some sort.
Yeah. And that's what happened with G.I. Joe and Smurfs and Care Bears. And there was other things. Oh, I know. Strawberry Shortcake was also a greeting card too.
Yeah.
So there was a whole bunch of stuff, but it got so ridiculous. I know that they just gave up. Buzz Dixon said, I talked to him a couple times, and he said, yeah, they couldn't keep up with it. Fine, just do it, whatever you want to do, advertise, whatever, because they kept finding ways around it and stuff like that.
Right.
It's very funny.
Yeah.
The violence and obviously war type stuff, and they had to get around this war type stuff. Action Force was a war property. It really was more so than G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe was a little bit fantasy, adventure, sci-fi, and it was in the near future, whereas Action Force was really a military war type thing.
Well, Action Force comes off of something, this comes back to the comics itself. So Action Force has to do with the comic series that Edgemont was putting out at the time. And Edgemont was a gun for hire. They were hired to create Action Force content. So they had a book previous called Battle, and Battle ran. It has, I don't know, like 900 issues of Battle.
Wow.
It was like this long running series, and they would feature stories in there. World War I, World War II, and Charlie's War shows up in it, which is a well documented series that got several accolades for its depiction of war and its kind of the psychological aspect behind war with Charlie's War. So that was a really big series that won a lot of awards. And so there was all these stories that were involved in Battle. And you can go back and you can pick up Battle, if you go on eBay, you can find Battle, copies and issues. And it was kind of the same way that Action Force Redux is set up. 6 pages each, and each story, 4 stories in each zine. So whenever you open this magazine up, or you open this periodical up, you would get those stories, but it would be like Enemy Ace, and it would be, you know, the Doughboys or something like that. And it would kind of cover military history. So when we talk about it being about war, that's where it gets its war frame from. So G.I. Joe had already depicted war previously from its 12-inch incarnation, and Action Man as well had depicted war from its previous incarnation. And I think that this has to do with history a lot as we go through Vietnam here within the States. And I'm not for certain what wars were going on for other nations, but Vietnam was seen as an unnecessary war here politically. So there was a lot of pushback from people to say that we don't need war toys anymore. So G.I. Joe was made to make changes, and therefore we get the adventures of G.I. Joe. So now he's running around solving these adventures, and then we get the adventure team, G.I. Joe. And then even past that, and a lot of people don't like to talk about it, but Super Joe after that, which deals more with space and pulls it out of the element of war and more into the element of adventure. So Palitoy, that book with Battle was very focused on war. So when they show up in Battle first, and Action Force is one of the strips inside Battle, and was hired by Palitoy, and Edgemont was hired by Palitoy to create those strips, and they began to until the folding of Action Force and the Red Shadows, and that whole story, acclimates. It ended up being their most popular strip out of everything else that they had done. So popular that after about a year or two, they changed the name from Battle to Battle Action Force. It still says Battle, but it's Action Force as the primary, and Action Force was the primary strip, that was included on top of it. So that's a big thing that Edgemont is continuing to run, Battle Action Force, and that ends up running for a couple more years. Then eventually it does change just to Action Force, but it changes over to Marvel when those hands go to Action Force. And then you have Action Force Weekly, Action Force Monthly, and then you also have those crossover series with the Transformers. Those were all very popular series, throughout the entire thing. So
and then domestically they did G.I. Joe European missions, I think.
And that was us here in the States. That was actually the weekly series or monthly series. I forget which one it was. It might have been the monthly series in the UK, and I think that Jim Shooter was probably the main guy involved with that, and he talked about it a couple of times in the most recent episode of Talking Joe. I think they interviewed him just now, and he talked about him going over there multiple times and talking about talking to the Marvel team over there that was producing, Action Force Monthly and Action Force Weekly. Yeah.
So the popularity obviously was kind of really big in Europe, but obviously the United States, it wasn't as hard because we didn't really know. We know a little bit about it. I knew a little bit about it, obviously, because of G.I. Joe European missions. I was like, wait a minute, this isn't exactly right. And there was obviously a translation type thing going on between the Europe and the United States when they translated this stuff over to us. The characters were slightly different, the names, some were a little different, the origins were different, and things like that. So the familiarity of that, yes, it was G.I. Joe, but it wasn't exactly G.I. Joe in that strictest sense, because they were incorporating G.I. Joe into Action Force and vice versa, kind of.
Yeah, most definitely. And they were also incorporating G.I. Joe into Transformers, to help their sales as they're moving through. Where here in the U.S. we had them as a mini series. They showed up 4 books, but they're very removed from the bigger picture. over there they had more of an involvement with them.
And I'll
Forward.
say, if you've ever read that 4-issue miniseries, I'm normally a very positive person, but that series is not very good. That's
Wait, are you talking about Generation 2 or Generation 1 series?
Generation 1 miniseries. Generation 2 was much better, and they incorporated that into the G.I. Joe series itself as well. But that first miniseries, try to read that, and I don't think you're going to make it all the way through it because it's rough.
But I hear, I think that I do believe that the Scully series is probably the best one I've read, and because he really, there's a lot of paving the way for Scully as he gets to his IDW G.I. Joe Transformers series. So he was allowed to do a lot of different things that probably weren't allowed previously. Devils do kind of like check mark off some things that would work and some things that wouldn't. So Scully gets to kind of go all out. And the writing is what is so good. I'm not the biggest fan of his artwork, but the writing is really good on the series. Yeah.
That's an interesting point, though, that a lot of the folks that worked on Action Force that were getting their foot in the door in Europe in the comics, and some of these people that are huge names today in the comic industry started with Action Force comics, and they went on to Marvel, DC, and IDW, and they've gotten themselves really big careers because of it. So that's an interesting thing to note as well. The Action Force had that involvement with a lot of these comic book people.
Yeah, they were very much involved in the industry. As I said, Marvel, this was their leg inside the UK. So they were constantly kind of checking on them and making sure that they had everything they needed, from what I can understand from the interviews I've listened to. When it comes to Jim Shooter and other people, as they were really focused on trying to put out what they felt was the best possible thing that they could do for Marvel UK. Yeah.
And there was a lot of stuff too. They weren't just putting out G.I. Joe European missions and doing all those magazine stuff over there. There was Pendragon, there was Captain Britain. There's a bunch of different stuff that they were doing besides the G.I. Joe Transformers, and there was the Hulk, the Incredible Hulk. Spider-Man had stuff, so they had a bunch of interesting stuff. So, but back to Action Force itself. So the kind of a melding of all these things together at the time must have been very difficult, because Action Force kind of fell off the radar there for a good, I would say, 15 years, maybe. If I want to be generous, maybe
Yeah, it might have been even longer.
maybe 18 years.
Yeah, because eventually what Hasbro does is it goes from, Hasbro took the toys from Action Force to Hasbro's Action Force, and then it was like G.I. Joe, the Action Force.
Right.
And then it just turns to G.I. Joe before 1989 or 1990. And then it's just G.I. Joe International Heroes. And then eventually they even drop the International Heroes, and it's just G.I. Joe. And obviously they're trying to cut some cost and some marketing moving through things. So they're trying to brand easier, and they wanted to be able to sell cross-branded items without having to change packaging all the time, which was costly, right? Adding up cost. I'm pretty certain that's why they did it. I don't have a confirmation of that, but
I'm sure it's in these two wonderful volumes here that are sitting right beside me, and I'm sure there's some interesting interviews in my Action Force comic book compilations that are on the way. I have on good authority that I might get them tomorrow or today. You never know. I'll cross my fingers. But
and oddly enough, Paddy and Lennon, Paddy and Brian, their book and I know Paddy's not here. Hopefully he makes it back in real soon. I'm going to pitch his book for him, and you can help me. So right now, this is on Kickstarter, guys. You can actually go and get a soft cover of this book. Now, what did this run you? I think these were like 80 or 80 pounds for this book.
It was about 120.
Yeah. So 120 US dollars for the hardback edition. Right now, he's got volume 1 on Kickstarter, and it is a softbound book. So I don't have these. This was a little out of my reach, as I just couldn't swing it at the time. So I'm excited for these back. And I did pledge money to this campaign for the softcover editions. And I'm excited to get those, the softcover for volume 1.
I did too, because I did the Scarlet level, because it included not only the soft cover, but the hard cover of this one again. And they're signed by both of those guys and their team. And the very unlikely scenario that I can get over to Ireland to get them to sign it, or they can come to the US, it's probably slim and none. But so I wanted the signed versions, and the previous one on the hardback, I didn't get all the art prints and all the extra accoutrements on that one. When I did it this time, I'm getting all that stuff. I love the prints and the posters and all the extra stuff. So that's why I went the full Scarlet. I think there's only like 15 of those available, and so I went that route in this one, because I was like, yeah, I'm gonna support it, continue to support, and at least it's different from the previous stuff that I've gotten, and if the stretch goals are met, we could get extra content for volume 1 paperback version, softcover version, that was not in the original hardcover version. So if you guys, there's more content that they had originally planned for the original stretch goals and never met those stretch goals. So in this one, if the stretch goals are met, they have like a lot more pages they can stick into the softcover. So it will actually be a different book, because this material and content will be in this version that wasn't in the original version.
That's good. That I'm excited to actually get this in my hands. Everyone has said it's a beautiful book. It's won awards. Hopefully Paddy can jump back on here soon and get us some more info on it, because I'm excited to hear that they won design award for this book. They won a design award.
They were nominated, and they were given a mention, which is like really high accolades, because it's a very rare thing to win it. But there was like 3 winners: the top, the second, and then third, and then they had a couple of mentions. They were in the mentions. So there's only 4 or 5 of these books that were in this awards thing. So they did get a mention. They didn't win, but it is a major honor to actually get a mention in it, from what I understand.
Yeah, you got to think that's probably out of 50,000 books, that they're in the top 10, so it kind of tells you where they're at as far as the level and quality that you're getting, with this. So, I'm pretty excited to get this in my hands. Like I said, I think I mentioned last time, I called out to Paddy and Brian and said, hey, I'll get it soon. So they're doing me a favor by putting this up so I can get the softcover edition,
Well, I think you're going to love it. One of the interesting things about this project is it is backed by Hasbro. They got a licensing agreement from Hasbro. So Hasbro is involved in this book, and their licensing agreement is very limited. So you're not going to get probably another release of this. So if you don't get it now, you don't do what you got to do to get this published. Both volumes previously have been very close to the wire and getting it funded, and that's why the stretch goals weren't met. And it's a shame, because they are you could tell made and created from the heart, and the work that these guys have done. And Bob Brecken had an interview in the first one. Chris McLeod's doing a forward in the second one from the Full Force, and there's a whole bunch of other content interviews. David McDonald is involved in the comic book part of it, where they go through the comics and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of material. It covers a lot of bases. It's not just about the toys. It's unpublished work, unproduced toys, there's just so much. The artwork, the that Brian Hickey has done on both volumes is just phenomenal. And you don't know by looking at how he could have created some of these angles and positions that the stuff he copied. Some of the prints were covers of the Action Force comic series, and some of them are just so brilliantly done. The work that he's done in this is just incredible, and I'm probably making poor Hawk here salivate by me talking about it with anticipation, but it's worth it. It's worth it, Hawk.
I'm definitely gonna get it then. I'm definitely gonna, I've already
They said, oh, sorry. They said the turnaround is going to be much quicker on this paperback version. They may have to do some editing, a little bit editing on the cover because it's smaller, this, that, or the other. And they said it's going to be coming quicker. So you're not going to have to wait a year to get this. You're going to be getting it probably in a month or so. So just to give you that.
That's pretty good, because that there's definitely been a lot of things going on shipping wise that has caused a lot of grief, and I'm not the only person that's in this boat. If you guys have already got into After Action Report 2, we're having the same problem that a lot of people are having. I think Brian Flynn is also having that problem. We've heard from several sources that everyone's kind of having this jam up that's going on right now. China is in Chinese New Year, but there has been kind of a lack of or shortage of labor and a shortage of people to be able to move things the way that they used to move. This is post-COVID. And I think they just had a string of COVID in China as of this date recording, probably no more than 3 weeks ago, or maybe even 4 weeks ago. They were back on COVID again, lockdowns and things like that. So that definitely affects shipping times. So I tell you this, so if you guys are participating in anything that's coming out of China right now, expect delays. I'm sorry. I wish it wasn't the case, but this is post-pandemic world, and we have to give it time.
And that's the interesting thing about a lot of stuff that's being moved from different countries, different continents, and stuff like that. Toys in general, I think we finally got out of the Hasbro lag up. I think we've passed that, and Super 7 is still a little bit stuck. They've been getting the reaction figures out on a regular basis, so I don't know if we just didn't hear about how that time frame was, so they didn't. It wasn't surprising to us when they came out. Maybe that's the case. I don't know, but Action Force and toys in general have always had this difficulty when it comes to this stuff. And recently, of course, with the COVID and stuff like that. But I don't want to talk about negative. I want to be positive. So I'm looking for the future, and I'm looking to see, with all these projects that are coming out and all these different mentions of Action Force and mentions of Palitoy related products, Skeletron, and all this stuff like that, is the future of Action Force bright?
Most definitely. I think that Ben Conway and Skeletron has really changed that. I mean, there was a lot of lead up to that. There was the book that we had put out, which was Palitoy's collector's guide, the Palitoy collector's guide that we put out. So there was that. There was a lot of build up to it that had shown a lot of real good potential for what was coming. And so I think moving forward, we're going to see more physical product. I'm certain of that. But I think we're also going to see more printed media as well. And we're going to see more involvement in the community understanding what these things are and how they came about and where they are in our mythos. And I can speak a little bit to that with Action Force Redux. So
and I was sorry to interrupt you, and I would be doing myself a disservice if I didn't mention Rising Sun Publishing has been doing reprints of the Action Force comics from the beginning, and they're like on volume 10. And so you can get this material. You can order through Rising Sun Publishing. They also have back issues of the Redux and other special projects that they've done. You can order. And they just got finished with a Kickstarter, a huge like omnibus type book a couple months ago. That was a successful Kickstarter, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, we've had 2 or 3 successful Kickstarters already. So yes, you can get the Action Force complete works at risingsuncomics.com. Go over there. It'll link you to, go to the store. It's going to jump you to Rising Sun Publishing, which is where we sell all of our stuff. But you're going to find all 10 volumes. So a few of the later volumes are still on pre-order, and that just has to do with China and all of that. But we will be printing them all. This is in read order, all in one place. You don't have to go hunt down individual copies. You can buy volumes 1 through 10 there and read through. So that's one of the projects that we had done. There's, Palitoy Collector's Guide actually defined, it's very similar to Paddy and Brian's book. It's more of how do you, here's all the parts for every figure. Here's everything that you need to know in that regard. So, but those are going for I was surprised. Those are selling for like 120 on eBay now.
Wow.
Yeah. So we did 3 printings of that book. So very popular. That was. We did Action Force Declassified. Now, this is the book that everyone's super excited for. That's the one that just got funded. Action Force Declassified actually covers that unreleased content from Action Force. And we all know how much we like that unreleased content from Action Force.
It's some cool stuff. I could probably pull it up in here.
Yeah, you can probably find some of those images in there. Yeah.
Let me see if I can pull some unproduced content.
I've got some really exciting things for you past that too, as well.
So go on with what you were saying before that. Before I interrupted.
So Redux was fully funded, and there's several. There's also an Action Force 40th anniversary. We did an Action Force 30th anniversary at Rollout Roll Call. This is Action Force 40th anniversary, 10 years later, and this is an update with that. So it's got some new pages in it, and it covers some of the stuff that we, that's happened since then up to now. It includes the Robo Skull, so there's a lot of add-ons of information into there. So those are several funded books from that alone. And then of course we have Action Force Redux, but I'll let you show this before we jump into Redux once you find it.
So I'm not entirely sure because I'm not that much of an expert. If Paddy was here, I could ask him if the space. I'm not sure if the Space Force was one of the unproduced groups.
There is an item in the Space Force that was unproduced, and actually, this gentleman I told you about earlier is recreating that project right now. That's exciting. That's very exciting to me. So it's a large transport shuttle. Matt Paul is actually rebuilding one of these.
Oh,
and 3D printed version of the transport. So, I think I think I've seen images of in Paddy and Brian's book.
I'm trying to find it. I'm sure it's in here. It's just a matter of getting to it.
Yeah, no worries. So you can go find some of this stuff on Blood for the Baron as well. You can actually read some of this older material there and get some insights to it. Action Force Redux is another project that we have been putting out, and we just come off a successful Kickstarter of that as well. So Action Force Redux is a 4-issue series currently. It's just the 4. What it does is it tells the story in between. So kind of the changeover from Baron Ironblood to Cobra Commander and how that all takes place. So it's more developed. You go into more developing it.
I like the behind the scenes.
Yeah. What's interesting about this project, it's all A-list. Everyone is A-list on this.
Robert Atkins.
We went back and we pulled as many of the original creators as we could get to come in and actually work on this and build it up. So I'm going to pull up just a couple of things here. There you go. Beautiful. That one. So, just that one was actually done by Moreno AQ. He is, and he's actually worked in the UK quite a bit. But some others that we've had Patrick Goddard. There's a Brian Atkins piece. Patrick Goddard, who has done several wonderful pieces of that. We have Brian and Robert, who have both Atkins, who have both participated in this book, and thankfully to them. These are wonderful authors of great people.
I can't say enough about the art, and it is 100% professional class, best comic art that you can find in today's industry. So they're not shirking that at all. And I'm a comic book guy, and I get hundreds of comics a month, and so I've been doing this since I was 6 years old, and I can tell you quality when I see it. So there you go.
Jeff Senior, who was originally on the Action Force line in the UK. He's one of the original artists for Action Force Monthly and Weekly.
Wow.
So that's who Jeff Senior is. And I think he may have even worked on the Edgemont stuff. I'm not for certain. I'd have to dig a little deeper. But Alejandro Cabal, who has worked on I believe he's worked with Death's Head in the UK. I'm Rebellion. I believe he works with Rebellion. And we have Kerouac, who now goes by Whack. I gotta explain this. Kerouac is very interesting guy. But apparently some right-wing specialist come out and tried to take the name Kerouac. And so if you're looking him up, he goes by Whack now, just W-A-C-K, Whack, because this right-wing guy is kind of like, so if you get to some right-wing content, you've gone too far. Go back. Artist only. Alan Shell, who has worked with Rising Sun a long time, a very good cartoonist. You've shown Moreno HQ and Kevin Hopgood. Guys, if you don't know who Kevin Hopgood is, he did work on the original Action Force weekly line. So he was another one of those original artists. Martin McKierney, another one, and the late great, and I will mention him here, Ralph Neese. He has already passed away, but he contributed to this project before, and he was a part of Action Force, the original Action Force, Battle Action Force that was actually released. So these are all A-listers, through that project. And we're also just trying to showcase and bring to light Palitoy's version of Action Force, Palitoy Action Force. So, so this is all written to flesh out the fall of the Red Shadows. I'm reading, I'm reading from my phone here, guys, because I got bullet notes to mention here by Jim Marshall, who is the writer, and working through things. So issues 1 through 4 are World Enemy number 1 prologues. So they're prologue content that goes in between the stories. And 5 through 8 are interludes. So they go in between the content, before, in between, and 9 through 12 are enemy epilogues. That's kind of how he has it set up. Right now, we're just trying to get 1 through 4 done. There's a lot of these came with a free poster and a trading card. I will tell you that we issue 3, we signed a partnership with GMC, Get My Comics, which is the largest distributor in the UK, and they are one of the largest distributors in the UK. They are handling issues 1 through 3, and then we're going to distribute issue 4 ourselves. So if you bought into it, there you go, bloodforthebaron.com, that you can go and check out some of that stuff. So I was expecting issue 3 to ship already, but I think he's having some very serious family issues. The guy that runs that over there. So give him some patience. We don't want to be the guy that, you don't want to be that guy that's, how do you put that? That is a little too pushy and resentment comes out of it. And then when you find out afterward what happened, you've got some serious regrets. Don't be that guy. We can be nicer than that. This is our community. We've always been well received and able to take care of things like that. So
I agree with you.
Give him some space. It's out of Rising Sun hands. It's out of Blood for the Baron. It's in GMC, and he's going to get it done, as soon as he can. I expect it anytime. With that, we launched issue 4 for a Kickstarter, which we were successfully funded. Thank you all. We were having a little bit of a hard time funding that, and thankfully the community stepped up and helped us to fill out issue 4. As you can see, with all A-lists and everything at high quality. And that book, I don't know if you realize it, but that book is, much larger than a normal comic book. It's actually printed much, much bigger. So this is a A4 UK standard. There it is, comic book next to that. So you see, this is a much bigger thing. And we wanted to stick to how the original would be released. Go ahead.
You can see that's much bigger. So I wouldn't say it's prestige format. It's just oversized, I guess. I think the advertising says it's oversized. Prestige is like the big G.I. Joe anniversary comics and those back in the 70s. So there you go.
Well, we decided to do this because that's how the UK versions, the weeklies, came out. There's the size.
Wow. So
it fits very nicely with your weeklies. If you have weeklies, they're the same size, right? So that's why that was done. So issue 4 Kickstarter, I can tell you that art is moving quickly. I wish I could share an image with you guys, but I don't. It's all on the computer. I would show you an exclusive piece of art here. I wonder. I'm seeing if there's
inform you the audience for this is not going to be within the time frame we're making. It's going to be a little bit down the road, so it's okay.
Yeah. Okay. But also we're gonna, if it is a little bit down the road, then they may miss this. But we plan on opening up the Blood for the Baron store on February 24th. It's going to run 10 days, and then or 8 days, and then close. And this is just for anyone that missed issue 4, issue 3, issue 2, issue 1. They'll all be for sale there, so we can get final printing numbers before we take issue 4 onward to its finish. So that'll open up on February 24th. If this gets out by then, you'll have 10 days basically, or 8 days to get in there.
Is that kind of like a backer kit or one of those things, like a Kickstarter type of thing where you add the store and they can purchase whatever they missed or whatever and add it to the
Yeah. We're just doing it through the Blood for the Baron website. So there'll be a chance if you missed it, you can jump in there and grab some copies.
Well, so I'm extremely excited because I think that we always need more adversaries, factions for G.I. Joe to go up against. And there's definitely some very unique, fun ideas within Action Force and Palitoy in and of itself. I'm looking forward to maybe someday getting me a Kraken figure because they go for some big money on the aftermarket. And some of the other fun stuff. And Skeletron's going to be doing a lot of figures with their Robo Skull Mark II, and those figures are going to be really cool. And there's different sizes, 6-inch and 3 and 4-inch POAs and all kinds of fun stuff. So I think the I agree with you, Hawk. I think the future is bright for Action Force, uh, regardless of the iteration that is coming out. Comic book, reference guides, toys, um, maybe some sort of video or movie content in the future. We don't know. So I think that the fans have spoken, obviously, or we wouldn't be getting a lot of these projects. The Skeletron was one of the highest funded Kickstarters in the history of Kickstarter. They got, I don't know, like $160,000 or something like that.
I thought it was way more.
It was it was a lot of money. I could have the numbers wrong. Ben Conway is a better person to ask you about, but I'm pretty sure it was around there. And so the fact that big toy companies in the United States, Super 7, Hasbro, are now doing related products. The comic companies like IDW that are major publishers in the United States and abroad are doing related content for Action Force. I'm looking forward to seeing what the future of the comic industry brings us with G.I. Joe. Maybe there'll be more Action Force things. And obviously, Rising Sun Publishing is not going to stop publishing Action Force content as well. They've got tons of awesome stuff. I've talked to Hawk on several occasions, and I'm very, very excited at the future through them. So, with books like the Total Action Force guides, that should help you look at these products and this content, read about the old comics, read about the toys, and get yourselves excited. And I hope, as a fan myself, the future continues for a very long time, along with G.I. Joe, and the merging of the two brands is going to be really excited for me, because I want more content. I want more toys. It's just, that's how I am. So I want to first off thank Paddy Lennon for joining us, author of the Total Action Force and Volume 2 as well. And I want to thank Hawk Sanders, publisher of Rising Sun Publishing. I also want to thank Brian Sauer. He's our tech guru. He does all our editing and special effects and things like that, for doing that for us. And for the G.I. Joe fan club, if you have a suggestion for a topic in the future for us to cover, you want to let us know in the comments below. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Keep it PG rated at the very least. We want to be positive. Like we were saying earlier, this is a fun community, and we want to maintain that fun and excitement going forward. So I thank you, Hawk, for your time today. And thank you, Paddy, if you watch this. Thank you for your time as well. And that's it. We'll see you next time.
Full force.
Full force indeed.